Hello again. Please join me in welcoming Director Michael Kaner and former Mayor of Toronto, John Sewell. The world's highest stage, please be careful. This building, by the way, while you're getting settled, when one of our board members purchased it 8 years ago, was refurbished by Hariri and Pontarini. And then we came along and purchased it back from him, so thank you to everybody for that. Are we all set to go? You can see us, hear us. I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then we will open it up to the floor for questions. Michael, I know you've had is it correct, no formal training as a filmmaker.
True.
What made you want to start making films, and what made you want to tell this particular story?
All right,
And thank you for it, by the way. It's like most I'm going to answer the question. Like most great documentaries, it's about a multiple of issues. It's a film about a building, but it's a film about a moment in time. It's a film about the history of this city, and it's a great marker, I think, on how we've changed so dramatically. But what made you want to tell this particular story?
That's one of those questions with 6 parts that you warned me you were going to ask. So you say that it marks a moment in time, and the moment in time that I think it marks is the kind of coming of age of Toronto. There were a whole bunch of factors that kind of were in conjunction. You heard about the citizen kind of activism that started with the saving of Old City Hall, the student protests, the number of immigrants that arrived in Canada at that period, the first Jewish mayor. There's all these things were happening at the same time, and they kind of reinforced one another into changing the city. But to get back to your original question, which I haven't forgot, which is I was a practicing lawyer for 30 years. I think you heard that at the beginning. And one day somebody phoned me up and said, I've got a legal question, and the legal case didn't go anywhere, but in the process of considering it, I said to this client, this story would make a really interesting book or a movie. And so we tried to get a movie made out of that particular situation, which didn't fly, but in the course of that conversation, I discovered that the client's mother, and I'm talking about Astra Burka, was Ellen Burka, who was this incredible figure skating coach. She coached Taller Cranston and choreographer for Elvis Stoico when he was a kid. And she was a Holocaust survivor. And so I heard all this stuff about Ellen, and I said, oh my God, we can't make a movie about this other idea we had, but your mother is an incredible person, and why don't we try to do it? So we did. I ended up producing it and writing the script, and I got the bug. And around that time, I decided I had it with practicing law, so I quit my job, as it were. And I'm not doing this as a full-time job. Believe me, you don't make any money at this, but it's certainly more than.
I meant good thing because it doesn't pay well, not because you're not good at it.
It certainly takes up a lot of time, but I have to say I love doing it, and I've done 4 long films now, and I'm hoping to do more.
I was proud and relieved when Robert Fulford said that Toronto wasn't hysterically anti-Semitic at the time. I don't know if everyone here will agree, but it was nice to hear, at least. I can ask both of you, what are your favorite buildings in the city? John, maybe you would start if you don't mind.
My favorite buildings?
In the city, yeah. Do you have one or a couple? Or?
Goodness. Well, Union Station, Maple Leaf Gardens, New City Hall. There are 3 ones that I like a lot. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, my list would include those. Probably St. Lawrence Hall is one of those older buildings. Osgood Hall, I was a lawyer, and I've been in that building many times, and it's one of the last surviving of those early 19th century buildings. I tend to like older structures rather than the more modern ones. But
I'm a big fan of that. Since nobody asked, I'll ask myself. Whitney Block is one of my favorite. That always makes my heart go flutter when I see it. John, thank you for your the work that you did in helping to stop the Spadina Expressway. I'm curious, could you say what surprised you most about how Toronto has changed in the last 56 years, 55 years?
Well, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the new City Hall and the sense that there's a real public space in which people should be gathering in front of it and exerting their political will. So I think the Stop Spadina movement was helped enormously by that. I know that the various fights that I was involved in terms of trying to go after the development industry and stop it were helped enormously by the fact there was a place to gather. It gave a real focus to the idea that this might be a city of people who could actually do something. Before that, there really wasn't anywhere to go. There wasn't a place that really centered that kind of public spirit.
Good point. I was wondering about the elevated walkways around Nathan Phillips Square. They always seem underused to me. Would you agree? Is there something we can do as a group? You know, march down to Nathan Phillips Square and have them turned into something better?
Well, I mean, I think that George Baird made the point well, that it's a colonnade that surrounds it. And I think the fact that there's a walkway above there, oh, look at that.
Welcome. Should we start over?
The fact that there's a walkway is sort of very, very secondary. And why would you go up there except to look down and see whatever gathering of people there was there?
Yeah.
But so it's the colonnade, I think, that's really important,
right?
Not the walkway.
Right. Michael?
Yeah, I agree with what John just said, but I want to add to that the driveway. Prince Philip was being very Philip-ish, I thought, when he was talking about the City Hall, and the car that he drove up onto the top of the podium on. It came up a driveway, which I only realized when I was reading a little biography of John C. Parkin, how that driveway was actually meant to go across University Avenue. It was to connect up with the new courthouse. At the time that City Hall was being planned, the new courthouse had not yet been built. But that was meant to be a driveway that was going to kind of link, all the way effectively from Old City Hall, across New City Hall, across the new courthouse, over to the other side of Bay Street, and act as a kind of conduit for dignitaries and maybe judges. I don't know who all were going to be going there, and it kind of got lost in the discussion about the building. But it was a kind of unique idea, and it was part of a phenomenon called the Plus 15 movement, if I could call it a movement, but which the idea of separating pedestrians from automobiles by putting them on elevated walkways above the street. Also a way to protect people from colder weather. The Plus 15 system is being used in Calgary and in Minneapolis in particular. And in Ontario, in Toronto, we ended up opting for what George Baird calls the minus 15 system.
Nobody move.
Which is an underground path. Right? An underground path rather than an overhead system of walkways. But that the idea of having this overhead driveway is kind of unique solution.
Right. You'd asked me before, Michael, about the Toronto letters outside in Nathan Phillips Square. By a show of hands, no judging, who likes those letters? The letters, the large letters outside the skating rink.
The Toronto sign.
The Toronto sign, pardon me. Yes, thank you. And who doesn't like them? Oh, there you go. So the yeas have it. Sorry, Michael.
It's okay.
Very good. It's democracy here in action. How common was it for student, or in the history of this city, for architecture students to actually have a voice? I'm not sure if either of you can answer this question, in new designs or building planning. Do you know, Michael? Or John?
A little bit. But the most recent film that I did is a history of Toronto Island, and it turns out that the same students who protested against this building, against the original City Hall building that resulted in our new wonderful City Hall being built, those same group of architectural students had actually made a proposal for the Toronto Island in the early 50s, which was being taken seriously. I'm happy to say it wasn't utilized because it involved building, apartments and warehouses and all sorts of other things on the island. But it tells you that the students actually did have a bit of a voice, and they were quite fearless. Obviously, they took on the architectural establishment. One of the frustrating things about doing films, as Chris could tell you, is that there's way more stuff that you don't see on the screen than you've collected. And there's a fantastic story about the kind of the students and the potential retribution they almost got at the hands of the University of Toronto as a result of daring to take on the architectural establishment at the time. I mean, it wasn't just the idea of a difference in art. These are also serious commercial and business problems.
Sure.
Architects had spent a lot of money on these plans. The city ended up effectively paying them off, paying them a lot of money for the plans that never got built as City Hall. They get recycled as the Imperial Oil headquarters.
Where can people see your film on Toronto Island?
Well, we've just had four screenings, and then the process of trying to get them in various places. At the moment, there's none scheduled.
Okay, great. John, you talked about what surprised you most about the changes in the city. What's disappointed you the most, would you say?
Oh, well, the last 20 years since the mega city, it's been really frustrating to see what's happened to the city. And that whole sense of energy.
Can you be more specific?
Sorry?
Can you be more specific?
Well, I mean, what's happened is that the former city of Toronto, which had this very powerful political culture that heavily involved citizens and great senses of consultation and an idea that you were involved in the city and you had some say in the kind of decisions we were making, that's all been gone. And the former city of Toronto is now outvoted by all the parts of the Toronto that were built after the 1950s, Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke, with a fundamentally different style, a suburban style. So it's wrecked the politics of the city, and I think most of us feel it's out of control. And if we look at the downtown, you can see that it's out of control. The rampant development we've had, it's been very disappointing the last 20-25 years.
If there are questions, please catch my colleague Jackie's eye. But in the interim, I'll ask you the same question, Michael. Is there something specific, or would you agree with John, or are there other things? I mean, obviously it's such a dynamic time in our history, and we are, I think, per capita, the most diverse city in the world.
Yeah,
it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it's kind of schizophrenic in a way. I mean, I agree with John that I arrived in Toronto in 1973 to go to law school.
From?
Originally from Saskatchewan, but I had gone to McGill and traveled around the world a little bit before I got here. And for that first 25 years of my life in Toronto, I felt like I was a part of what was happening at the city. People like John and the city councillors that I worked for, and I worked in many municipal elections over the years, and I felt I was being listened to. There was an opportunity. We didn't always get our way, but the last 20 years, it may just be the scale of the city and the pace of the city and what's happened to the real estate market. It's driving normal people away from the city. I'm being one of the beneficiaries of the rising real estate market because I had a house, but I don't like the way the city has changed as a result of that, and so I think it's lost something as a result.
Thank you. We have a question here, please. And if there are any in the balcony, we have a microphone up there too, so avail yourself of that.
My frustration was the lack of zoning, but the question to you is, what do you know about the people who developed the property, who built New City Hall?
the contractors, you mean? Yes. It was a company called Anglin Norcross, which in sort of the sad end of the story is they went bankrupt in 1967, shortly after City Hall got built, and I think in no small measure because it was a very difficult building to do. It was probably very difficult to bid on. The tendering process, which Karen Teeple talks about, a little bit about, the tendering for the architectural competition, was reflected in the construction process as well. The word was filtered out by Nathan Phillips, who was the mayor at the time, that he couldn't get more than $25 million construction budget approved at City Council. And so it was with bated breath that they opened the envelopes from the tenders in 1960 or 61. I'm losing track of the dates. And it came in at $23.5 million. So there was a kind of sigh of relief by Nathan Phillips and others that they were going to be able to do this. Of course, there were cost overruns. There was talk in the film about how the design had to be changed as a result of technical flaws, although there was some debate about how much the flaws were technical and how much it was a result of the disagreements between Revell and John C. Parkin about what the building should look like, that maybe that the technical flaws are just an excuse for making changes that Parkin wanted to see. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but I've heard that kind of conversation go on. The final construction price ended up close to $30 million. Cost overruns were part of it, but the building kept getting added to over time as well. The registry office ended up being put into City Hall. There's a library in there. I think they added another story because the construction cost was $23.5 million less than they thought, so they actually added a story or two to the building. So it ballooned over time to end up about $30 million. One of the, am I going too far in my answer here? Well, one of the really interesting things, which once again didn't make it into the 71-minute film, was that Mike Stewart talks about this. Mike's in the audience, by the way. Thank you for coming, Mike. There are these panels, 4,000 panels, concrete panels with the marble inlaid that were used to clad City Hall, but they also acted as a form for the structural walls. And there had to be a whole new kind of technology developed to build those structures, and the wind tests that were done to decide the structural issues because of the unusual building shape. There was no kind of formula for measuring that with a building that wasn't rectangular or square. These sharp points, and it was rounded, and all that stuff, so that there were some new techniques that had to be developed there. So the building really became a catalyst for all sorts of social change, as John's talked about, but also this technological change. The use of concrete became much more elaborate and dynamic.
You made some great points about concrete. In the balcony, please. I think there's a question.
Yes, hi. Love the movie and love the many layers of it. The one area I was hoping to hear more about was the aerial view of the building and the eye shape, and was just wondering if that was purposeful by Revell and if there was a bit more information on that.
I don't know if people heard that question altogether, but it was what about the aerial view? The idea is that if you're directly over top of City Hall, you see the two cylindrical buildings with the oyster in the center looking like an eyeball. And the theory is that in Finland, the eye is the symbol of democracy, and that was a deliberate intention on Revell's part, or he and his collaborators' part. It's possible that it was. I've heard this story. I didn't leave it out on purpose. It's just one of the many details that get lost when you try to keep a film to a reasonable length. But there may very well be something to it. And he was very intent, I think, on making the building accessible, making it a public place. democratic place. Those of you who know the building, and I guess everybody here does, the back wall has no windows on it. They're all in the front, on the part that overlooks the council chamber. And the idea was that the bosses would be sitting at the back wall and not get the benefit of the windows, but the clerical staff and the secretaries would be sitting along the front and get the benefit of the windows. Just a small example of this kind of democratic spirit that was involved.
We're going to wrap this part of our show up right now, but please sit tight as Peter Harris is going to join us here. We can step down, guys, but Peter's going to show us a short presentation on Toronto Star Architects. But Michael, thank you again and congratulations. I really enjoyed the film. And